Captain Jake Morrison felt the familiar vibration of the Meridian's engines shift into an unnatural harmonic as something massive emerged from hyperspace directly ahead of their cargo vessel. The bridge's warning systems erupted in a symphony of alerts, but Morrison's weathered hands remained steady on the controls as he processed what his sensors were telling him. The ship that had just materialized was impossibly large, its crystalline hull reflecting their cargo haulers' running lights like a predatory smile frozen in the void. "Maria, tell me our engines can outrun whatever that thing is," Morrison called to his chief engineer, though he already knew the answer from the way Maria Rodriguez's shoulders had tensed at her console. The Meridian was built for hauling mining equipment to frontier worlds, not for speed, and the alien vessel's graceful approach spoke of technology far beyond human capabilities. Communications Officer Lisa Parker worked frantically at her station, cycling through every frequency known to human space, but the massive ship remained silent except for the low-frequency pulses that seemed to resonate through the Meridian's hull itself. Navigator Tyler Brooks called out distance measurements with increasing urgency as the alien craft drew closer, its size becoming more apparent with each passing second. It was easily 50 times the length of their cargo hauler, its surface covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living crystal. When the tractor beam engaged, Morrison felt the familiar helplessness of a man watching natural forces beyond his control, but beneath that resignation burned the stubborn determination that had carried him through 20 years of freight runs to the galaxy's most dangerous corners. The aliens who materialized on their bridge moments later moved with the fluid grace of beings who had never known the concept of physical limitation, their crystalline skin refracting the emergency lighting into prismatic displays that hurt to look at directly. Commander Veltar, as the being would later identify itself, regarded the human crew with the casual interest of a scientist observing particularly clever insects, its melodious voice carrying undertones that resonated in their bones as it spoke in perfect, if oddly accented, English about their quaint little vessel and amusing attempts at interstellar commerce. Morrison watched his crew, Rodriguez with her quick engineer's mind, Parker with her gift for languages, Brooks with his navigator's attention to detail, pilot Alex Thompson with his steady nerves, Dr. Robert Chen with his careful observations, and Security Chief Marcus Williams with his tactical awareness, and saw in their eyes not fear, but the same calculating look he'd seen in countless dangerous situations throughout their careers together. The Zephyrians, as they called themselves, treated the capture as routine, discussing among themselves in musical tones about the primitive propulsion systems and crude computational methods they'd observed, never noticing that every dismissive comment was being carefully filed away by minds that had learned to survive by turning limitations into advantages, weaknesses into strengths, and underestimation into opportunity. The energy fields that confined them hummed with a frequency that made Morrison's teeth ache, but the transparent barriers also provided an unobstructed view of the Zephyrian crew's daily operations, and he quickly realized that their captor's greatest strength might also be their most exploitable weakness. Maria Rodriguez pressed her palm against the energy field's edge, feeling the electromagnetic pulse that kept them contained while watching alien technicians glide past their detention area with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed, each gesture triggering automated responses from the ship's systems that anticipated their needs before they were even expressed. "Look at how they interact with their technology," Rodriguez murmured to Morrison during one of the brief periods when their guard's attention wandered to other duties, her engineer's mind cataloging every detail of the seamless integration between the crystalline beings and their vessel. The Zephyrians never seemed to manually operate anything. A simple touch or gesture would cause panels to reconfigure themselves, displays to materialize in midair, and complex calculations to resolve without any apparent input from the operators themselves. Tyler Brooks had positioned himself at the corner of their shared detention area where he could observe the maximum amount of corridor traffic, his navigator's instincts automatically mapping the ship's layout through the patterns of movement and the architectural cues visible through their transparent prism. He watched maintenance crews follow specific routes that revealed the underlying structure of the massive vessel, noting how certain areas seemed to pulse with different energies and how the crystalline walls themselves appeared to channel information through fiber optic networks that resembled living neural pathways more than traditional wiring. Lisa Parker sat cross-legged in meditation-like concentration, her eyes closed and head tilted as she focused on the constant background harmonics that filled the ship, gradually separating the various frequencies and beginning to understand that the Zephyrians' musical speech was only the surface layer of a much more complex communication system. She discovered that their crystalline physiology allowed them to transmit data directly through harmonic resonance, creating a kind of biological internet that operated at frequencies just below human hearing, and she began to suspect that this seamless connectivity was both the source of their technological superiority and a potential point of vulnerability. Dr. Robert Chen observed everything with the systematic approach of a scientist studying an alien ecosystem, noting how the Zephyrians' movements became more synchronized during certain ship operations, as if they were literally thinking in harmony, and how their crystalline skin patterns shifted in response to emotional states and external stimuli in ways that might be predictable under the right circumstances. Marcus Williams cataloged every security measure he could observe, from the energy field generators that held them prisoner to the elegant weapons the guards carried, noting that while the technology was far advanced, the aliens' tactical awareness seemed limited by their assumption that superior technology automatically guaranteed superior outcomes. Alex Thompson watched the ship's flight operations through the occasional glimpses of the command deck, observing that while the Zephyrians' piloting was flawlessly efficient, it followed patterns so rigid they bordered on instinctual rather than adaptive, as if their perfect integration with their technology had cost them the ability to improvise when systems didn't perform exactly as expected. The most telling observation came during a shift change when Morrison watched a young Zephyrian technician struggle with a malfunctioning display panel, becoming increasingly agitated as the automated repair systems failed to resolve the issue, apparently unable to conceive of manually troubleshooting the problem or approaching it from a different angle. They've become so dependent on their technology thinking for them that they've forgotten how to think around it, Rodriguez whispered during another unguarded moment, her words carrying implications that sent a spark of hope through the imprisoned crew. Commander Veltar visited their detention area periodically, always accompanied by other officers who listened with polite attention as he delivered what were clearly lectures about primitive species and the importance of maintaining proper galactic order, never noticing that his human audience was absorbing every detail about Zephyrian hierarchy, decision-making processes, and the casual arrogance that prevented them from considering humans as anything more than an amusing biological curiosity. The aliens' discussions about their specimens revealed a level of overconfidence that bordered on the absurd. They spoke openly about ship operations, strategic plans, and technological capabilities in front of their prisoners, apparently unable to conceive that beings they considered barely sentient could understand or exploit such information. As the ship's artificial day cycle progressed, Morrison found himself remembering an old military saying about how the most dangerous enemy was the one who underestimated you, and he began to suspect that the Zephyrians' technological superiority had blinded them to humanity's greatest advantage, the ability to adapt, improvise, and find solutions that no automated system would ever think to attempt. The opportunity for resistance came disguised as forced labor when Commander Veltar decided that his human specimens should earn their keep by performing maintenance tasks that the ship's automated systems deemed beneath the attention of proper crew members, a decision that Rodriguez recognized as the first significant tactical error their captors had made since the capture began. Under the casual supervision of a single Zephyrian guard who seemed more interested in the harmonic patterns flowing through the ship's neural networks than in watching primitive beings fumble with simple repair tasks, Rodriguez found herself working in the secondary engineering sections where the ship's backup systems hummed with barely contained power that felt familiar despite its alien origin. She quickly discovered that while Zephyrian technology operated on principles far more advanced than human engineering, the fundamental laws of physics still applied, and energy still flowed according to patterns that her 20 years of experience could read like a familiar language, even when expressed through crystalline conduits and harmonic regulators that resembled musical instruments more than traditional machinery. The guard's attention wandered completely during the third hour of her shift, apparently trusting that the automated monitoring systems would alert him to any significant problems, giving Rodriguez the freedom to explore how the ship's secondary systems interfaced with the primary networks that controlled everything from life support to weapons targeting. She began with the most subtle adjustments possible, introducing tiny variations in the harmonic frequencies that regulated power distribution to non-critical systems, changes so small that they fell well within normal operational parameters but created cascading resonances that would gradually accumulate into larger system inefficiencies over time. Dr. Chen's medical duties provided him with even more direct access to Zephyrian physiology when several crew members reported headaches and disorientation that the ship's medical systems couldn't adequately address, symptoms that Chen privately suspected were side effects of prolonged exposure to the electromagnetic frequencies that permeated every surface of the alien vessel. His examination of the affected humans revealed unusual neural activity patterns that correlated with specific frequency ranges, and when he was granted access to the ship's medical bay to treat a guard who had suffered a minor injury during a routine inspection, Chen was able to observe firsthand how Zephyrian biology functioned at the cellular level. Their crystalline skin wasn't merely decorative, it served as a complex network of biological fiber optics that channeled information directly into their nervous systems, creating the seamless integration with technology that made them so formidable, but also creating a dependency that ran deeper than mere convenience. Chen noticed that when isolated from the ship's harmonic field for more than a few minutes, Zephyrians became visibly agitated and their decision-making abilities seemed to deteriorate, as if they were experiencing a form of technological withdrawal that affected their cognitive functions. More importantly, he observed that their crystalline biology resonated sympathetically with certain electromagnetic frequencies, and while most of these resonances were beneficial, creating the harmonics that allowed their technology to function, some frequency combinations seemed to cause discomfort or even mild disorientation in the aliens he observed. During his carefully casual conversations with other crew members during meal periods, Chen shared his observations with Morrison and the others, describing how the Zephyrians' greatest strength, their biological integration with their technology, might also represent their most significant vulnerability if humans could find a way to disrupt the harmonic frequencies that their physiology required for optimal function. Parker had been making progress in understanding the aliens' communication systems, discovering that their spoken language was only the surface layer of a much more complex information exchange that relied heavily on subsonic harmonics, and she began to suspect that the right combination of frequencies might be able to interfere with their ability to coordinate effectively with each other and with their ship's systems. Thompson had noticed during his brief glimpses of the flight deck that Zephyrian pilots seemed to rely entirely on their harmonic interface with the navigation systems, never using manual controls or backup procedures, suggesting that disrupting their biological connection to the ship might leave them unable to operate their own vessel effectively. Williams observed that the security systems operated on similar principles, with guards relying on harmonic alerts and automated threat assessment rather than traditional surveillance methods, creating potential blind spots that could be exploited if the humans could find a way to generate the right kind of electromagnetic interference. Brooks had been mapping the ship's power distribution networks through careful observation of the energy patterns visible in the walls, and he'd identified several key junction points where a precisely timed disruption might cascade through multiple systems simultaneously, creating the kind of widespread confusion that would be necessary for any escape attempt to succeed. As the artificial night cycle began and the Zephyrians retired to their regeneration chambers where they recharged their biological batteries through direct connection to the ship's power grid, Morrison felt the first stirrings of a plan that went far beyond simple escape, a plan that would turn the aliens' technological superiority into a weakness and demonstrate that sometimes the most primitive solution was also the most effective one, especially when applied by minds that had learned to survive by thinking outside the boundaries that more advanced civilizations have forgotten how to cross. The escape attempt began at 0347 ship time when Rodriguez triggered a carefully calculated power fluctuation in the detention area's energy field generators, a surge designed to look like a random system malfunction while creating a 12-second window during which the containment barriers would flicker just enough to allow human passage but not enough to trigger the automated alarms that monitored for complete field collapse. Morrison had spent 3 days timing the guard rotations and identifying the brief overlap period when the corridor outside their detention area would be temporarily unmonitored, and Thompson had used his pilot's reflexes to memorize the exact sequence of movements needed to reach the nearest access panel before the emergency lighting could fully activate. The plan unfolded with precision born of desperation and careful observation. Rodriguez's power surge worked exactly as calculated, the barriers flickered for the predetermined interval, and Morrison led his team through the opening with movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed. But their success lasted exactly 47 seconds before the ship's neural network identified the intrusion and responded with countermeasures that demonstrated just how thoroughly the Zephyrians had integrated their technology with their biological systems. The corridor walls themselves seemed to come alive as crystalline conduits pulsed with warning signals that resonated through every surface of the ship, and before the humans had traveled 50 meters from their detention area, the very air around them began to thicken with an electromagnetic field that made their movements sluggish and their thoughts cloudy, as if they were trying to run through increasingly viscous fluid while their nervous systems struggled against harmonic interference. Designed specifically to incapacitate non-crystalline biology, Thompson managed to reach the access panel he'd targeted, and his fingers worked frantically at the alien interface while his vision blurred from the electromagnetic pressure building around them. But instead of finding the simple control system he'd expected, he discovered something far more complex and infinitely more valuable. The ship's neural network operated as a living entity that responded to touch, thought, and intention in ways that transcended traditional programming, creating possibilities that no human engineer had ever imagined, but also revealing vulnerabilities that no Zephyrian would ever consider. Williams attempted to hold their rear guard position, but the security response was unlike anything in his military experience. Instead of armed guards rushing to stop them, the ship itself became their opponent, with walls shifting to block passages, floors generating magnetic fields that pulled at their equipment, and ceiling panels releasing harmonic frequencies that disrupted human coordination while leaving Zephyrian physiology completely unaffected. Parker tried to use her growing understanding of the aliens' communication systems to confuse their response, broadcasting interference on the frequencies she'd identified as critical to their coordination, and for a brief moment she achieved something remarkable. The ship's automated systems hesitated, as if uncertain how to process inputs that didn't match any known biological signature, giving her teammates precious seconds to gather more intelligence about the vessel's neural architecture before the Zephyrians compensated with manual overrides. Dr. Chen supported Morrison as the electromagnetic fields intensified, but even as his body struggled against the alien countermeasures, his mind was cataloging every detail of how the ship's defensive systems operated, noting that they were designed to incapacitate rather than kill, and that their effectiveness seemed calibrated specifically for crystalline biology, creating interference patterns that would be devastating to Zephyrian nervous systems but merely uncomfortable for human physiology. Brooks managed to access a secondary data port during the chaos, downloading what appeared to be navigational data but turned out to be something far more significant: a complete map of the ship's neural pathways, showing how information flowed through the crystalline networks that connected every system aboard the massive vessel, and revealing that the Zephyrians had created something that was less like a starship and more like a single vast organism with distributed intelligence that could be influenced, manipulated, and potentially controlled by anyone who understood how to interface with its biological components. The humans were back in detention within 4 minutes of their escape attempt, but those 4 minutes had provided them with intelligence that would have taken months to gather through passive observation, and as Commander Veltar arrived to personally oversee their return to captivity, his musical voice carried tones of amused disappointment rather than concern or respect. "I had hoped for more creativity from your species," Veltar told Morrison with the patronizing patience of a teacher correcting a particularly slow student, completely missing the satisfied gleam in the human captain's eyes as he submitted to the energy field restraints. The other Zephyrian officers who gathered to observe the aftermath spoke among themselves in harmonics that Parker now understood well enough to translate, and their casual dismissal of human capabilities reached new heights of arrogance as they discussed implementing additional security measures just to prevent these amusing creatures from injuring themselves in future escape fantasies. The failed escape convinced the aliens that their initial assessment had been overly generous. Humans weren't just primitive, they were pathetically incompetent, unable to even properly operate the most basic alien technology despite being given direct access to it, and this revelation led to a relaxation of security protocols that would prove far more valuable than any successful escape could have been. As the ship returned to normal operations and the Zephyrians dismissed the incident as a brief entertainment, Morrison exchanged meaningful glances with his crew members, each of whom had gathered pieces of a puzzle that was finally beginning to reveal the complete picture of how their captor's greatest achievement might also become the instrument of their downfall. The week following their failed escape attempt became the most productive period of covert operations that Morrison had ever experienced, as the Zephyrians' renewed confidence in human incompetence created opportunities that would have been impossible under normal security protocols, allowing Rodriguez to expand her subtle sabotage from simple power fluctuations to a comprehensive infiltration of the ship's neural networks that began with seemingly innocent maintenance requests and evolved into something approaching technological symbiosis. Her daily work assignments now included access to primary engineering systems that the aliens no longer bothered to monitor closely, and she discovered that the ship's crystalline neural pathways responded to human touch in ways that their designers had never anticipated, creating feedback loops that allowed her to introduce cascading errors into non-critical systems while simultaneously learning to read the ship's biological rhythms like a living heartbeat. The beauty of her approach lay in its subtlety. Instead of causing obvious malfunctions that would trigger investigation, she introduced tiny inconsistencies in system timing, microscopic variations in power distribution, and almost imperceptible delays in automated responses that accumulated over time like compound interest, creating an ever-growing web of minor inefficiencies that the ship's self-diagnostic systems couldn't identify as deliberate sabotage because they fell within acceptable operational parameters when examined individually. Parker had transformed her communication duties from passive observation to active manipulation, using her growing fluency in Zephyrian harmonic language to access communication arrays during routine maintenance periods, where she discovered that the aliens' biological integration with their technology had created security vulnerabilities that no traditional cybersecurity protocol could address. She learned to mimic the harmonic signatures of authorized personnel well enough to access secondary communication networks, and from there she began mapping the ship's information infrastructure with the patience of an archaeologist uncovering ancient treasures, cataloging everything from crew schedules and supply inventories to tactical protocols and navigational databases. Her most significant breakthrough came when she realized that the ship's communication systems were designed to anticipate and fulfill requests before they were completely articulated, creating opportunities to inject her own instructions into the data stream by crafting harmonic sequences that the automated systems would interpret as legitimate commands from authorized users. Brooks had turned his navigator's instincts toward understanding the ship's movement patterns, discovering that the massive vessel operated according to flight plans so rigid and predictable that they bordered on instinctual behavior, following predetermined courses through hyperspace with the mechanical precision of a clockwork mechanism that never deviated from established patterns even when more efficient routes were available. This revelation led him to access the navigation systems during his expanded work duties, where he learned that Zephyrian pilots interfaced with their ships so completely that they rarely used manual overrides or backup procedures, creating dependencies that could be exploited by anyone who understood how to disrupt the biological connections between crew and vessel. Thompson had convinced his guards to allow him occasional access to secondary flight control stations under the pretense of satisfying human curiosity about superior alien technology, and these brief encounters taught him that the ship's piloting systems were far more intuitive than human spacecraft but also far more vulnerable to interference, requiring constant harmonic feedback to maintain optimal performance and becoming increasingly erratic when that feedback was disrupted or contaminated. With conflicting signals, Dr. Chen continued his medical observations while expanding into biochemical analysis, using his access to the ship's medical facilities to study how Zephyrian physiology responded to various environmental changes, and he began conducting subtle experiments with electromagnetic frequencies that could influence their biological functions without causing obvious harm or triggering medical alerts. Williams had parlayed his security background into advisory discussions with Zephyrian guards who seemed genuinely curious about human military tactics, conversations that he used to gather intelligence about their weapons systems, defensive protocols, and command structures while simultaneously identifying weaknesses in their approach to shipboard security that stemmed from their over-reliance on automated systems and their inability to conceive of threats that operated outside traditional parameters. The coordination of these individual efforts required communication methods that would remain invisible to their captors, and the crew developed a system of seemingly casual conversations during meal periods and work assignments that used coded references to shared experiences and inside jokes to exchange critical information about system vulnerabilities, operational schedules, and tactical opportunities. Morrison watched his team's progress with growing confidence, recognizing that they were no longer planning an escape but rather a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had defined their captivity, and as the ship's artificial days passed in routine operations that masked increasingly sophisticated preparation for what would essentially amount to a hostile takeover of the most advanced vessel any human had ever encountered, he felt the familiar anticipation that came before decisive action, knowing that their window of opportunity was approaching and that when it opened, they would have exactly one chance to prove that sometimes the most primitive approach was also the most effective one. The assault began at 1347 ship time with Rodriguez triggering a precisely calculated harmonic cascade that she'd been building toward for weeks, a resonance frequency that propagated through the ship's crystalline neural networks like a virus designed specifically to exploit the Zephyrians' greatest technological achievement by turning their biological integration against them in ways that no automated defense system could anticipate or counter. Her weeks of subtle sabotage had created a network of microscopic vulnerabilities throughout the ship's infrastructure, and when she introduced the cascade frequency through what appeared to be a routine maintenance procedure, every accumulated inefficiency suddenly amplified into catastrophic system failures that spread through the vessel's neural pathways faster than the Zephyrians could process what was happening to their perfectly ordered technological environment. Parker simultaneously launched her communication assault from 3 different access points, flooding the ship's harmonic networks with carefully crafted interference patterns that mimicked legitimate command authorizations while introducing chaos into the biological feedback loops that the crew relied upon for coordination with their vessel, and within seconds the bridge crew found themselves cut off from the ship's neural network, their crystalline biology suddenly unable to interface with systems that had responded to their thoughts and intentions for their entire careers. Brooks activated the navigation disruption he'd been planning since his first access to the flight control systems, introducing contradictory course corrections that forced the autopilot into an endless loop of conflicting priorities while simultaneously broadcasting false positional data that convinced the ship's sensors they were traveling through an asteroid field that existed only in the navigational computer's compromised databases. Thompson took control of the auxiliary piloting systems through a series of manual overrides that the Zephyrians had never needed to learn, his human pilots training in backup procedures and emergency protocols allowing him to maintain basic flight control even as the ship's primary systems fought against each other in increasingly destructive feedback loops that filled the vessel with harmonic discord. Dr. Chen released a carefully modulated electromagnetic pulse through the ship's medical networks, a frequency combination that he'd designed to cause disorientation and confusion in Zephyrian physiology without permanent harm, and as the pulse propagated through the vessel's life support systems, the alien crew began experiencing the technological equivalent of sensory deprivation, their biological dependence on harmonic feedback leaving them increasingly unable to function as the ship's neural networks descended into chaos. Williams initiated his security protocol disruption from multiple points throughout the ship, using his knowledge of Zephyrian defensive procedures to trigger false alarms that sent automated systems into lockdown while simultaneously disabling the very communication networks that would allow the security teams to coordinate an effective response to the rapidly escalating crisis. Morrison moved through corridors that rang with discordant harmonics as the ship's neural networks fought against the human interference, his destination the command center where Commander Veltar and his senior officers struggled to comprehend how their technologically superior vessel had suddenly become as unresponsive as a dead whale drifting through space, their crystalline biology recoiling from interfaces that now produced pain instead of the seamless connection they'd known since birth. The Zephyrian crew's attempts to regain control revealed the fatal flaw in their technological philosophy. They had become so dependent on their biological integration with their systems that they had lost the ability to operate their own ship through manual controls, and as Morrison burst onto the bridge followed by his team, he found alien officers staring helplessly at control panels that might as well have been abstract art for all the good their advanced education could do them in the face of systems that required physical manipulation rather than harmonic thought. Veltar's musical voice had become a harsh discord of frustration and disbelief as he watched primitive humans operate Zephyrian technology with an efficiency that his own crew couldn't match, their adaptation to manual control procedures highlighting the irony that the ship's human captives had become more capable of operating the vessel than its original designers. the command center filled with the sound of human voices calling out system status reports and coordinating their takeover with the kind of aggressive competence that came from years of experience with equipment that broke down regularly and required constant manual intervention, their primitive approach to technology suddenly proving far more robust than the elegant but fragile biological interfaces that had failed the Zephyrians in their moment of greatest need. As Rodriguez announced that she had achieved full control of the ship's power systems, and Parker confirmed that she had locked out all remaining Zephyrian access to the communication networks, and Brooks reported that navigation was responding to human commands while Thompson maintained stable flight control despite the ongoing system conflicts, Morrison realized that they had accomplished something that would have been impossible through conventional tactics. They had captured an alien warship not by matching its technological sophistication, but by exploiting the overconfidence and overdependence that such sophistication had created in its creators. The reversal of fortune was so complete and so sudden that Commander Veltar found himself standing in the same energy field detention area where he had once lectured his human prisoners about the natural order of galactic civilization, his crystalline skin flickering with patterns of confusion and disbelief as he watched Captain Morrison issue commands from the captain's chair with the casual authority of someone who had been born to command starships rather than someone who had learned to operate alien technology through careful observation and stubborn determination. The Zephyrian bridge crew huddled together in adjacent detention cells, their harmonious voices reduced to discordant whispers as they struggled to comprehend how beings they had dismissed as barely sentient had not only seized control of their vessel but were operating it with an efficiency that exceeded their own crew's performance during normal operations, Rodriguez's engineering modifications having actually improved the ship's power distribution beyond factory specifications while Parker's communication protocols provided clearer data flow than the original biological interfaces had ever achieved. Thompson piloted the massive warship through a series of complex maneuvers that would have challenged even the most experienced Zephyrian pilot, his human training in manual flight control allowing him to push the vessel's performance envelope in ways that their biological integration had never permitted, while Brooks calculated navigation solutions that took advantage of gravitational anomalies and hyperspace currents that the ship's original programming had been too conservative to exploit. The most devastating revelation for Veltar came when he realized that his crew's technological superiority had been an illusion based on biological dependency rather than genuine understanding. The humans had learned to operate Zephyrian systems better than their creators by approaching them without the preconceived limitations that came from a lifetime of harmonic interface, treating each control panel and system network as a puzzle to be solved through experimentation and logical deduction, rather than as an extension of their own biology that should respond automatically to their thoughts and intentions. Dr. Chen monitored the alien prisoners' vital signs while conducting what he diplomatically termed physiological research, discovering that prolonged separation from their ship's neural networks caused Zephyrians to experience something analogous to phantom limb syndrome, their crystalline biology literally craving the harmonic feedback that had defined their existence for so long that they had forgotten how to function as independent entities rather than components in a larger technological organism. Williams established security protocols that turned the Zephyrians' own detention systems against them, but unlike their former captors, he maintained constant surveillance and regularly rotated guard duties among the human crew, applying military discipline and tactical awareness that prevented the kind of complacency that had allowed the humans to gather intelligence during their own imprisonment. The irony was not lost on Morrison that the aliens who had once mocked human primitive technology were now completely helpless without their biological interfaces, while his crew had adapted to operating the most advanced vessel in known space using nothing more than manual controls, visual displays, and the kind of hands-on problem-solving that came naturally to a species that had evolved to survive in hostile environments through tool use and cooperative intelligence. Parker had established communication with human colonies throughout the sector, broadcasting updates about their situation that painted a very different picture of humanity's technological capabilities than the Zephyrians had expected, her messages describing not a rescue request but a first contact scenario in which humans had demonstrated their ability to commandeer and operate alien technology with unprecedented success. The psychological impact on the Zephyrian crew was perhaps more significant than their physical captivity, as they grappled with the realization that their entire civilization's sense of superiority had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what constituted advanced technology. They had created systems so sophisticated that they required biological integration to operate, while humans had built systems so robust that they could be repaired with improvised tools and operated by anyone with sufficient determination and intelligence. Veltar's attempts to negotiate for his crew's release revealed another layer of irony, as his musical voice carried the same desperate undertones that Morrison's had contained during their initial capture, and his promises of technological exchange and peaceful coexistence sounded remarkably similar to the pleas that humans had made when the situation was reversed, though Morrison noted with satisfaction that his former captor's offers carried a respect and urgency that had been completely absent during their earlier interactions. The command center's display showed that other Zephyrian vessels were responding to distress signals that the humans had decided not to jam, approaching at maximum speed to what they assumed would be a rescue operation but what Morrison knew would actually be humanity's formal introduction to galactic civilization as equals rather than curiosities, and as he watched the approaching ships on the tactical display, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with representing his entire species in a first contact scenario that would determine humanity's place among the stars for generations to come. The approaching Zephyrian fleet consisted of 7 warships that dwarfed even the Dominion's Edge, their crystalline hulls blazing with harmonic energies as they prepared for what their commanders assumed would be a simple rescue operation. But Morrison had no intention of returning to the role of primitive specimen now that he understood the true nature of the technological gap between their species. It wasn't that humans lacked advanced technology, but rather that they had developed a fundamentally different relationship with their tools that emphasized adaptability over integration, resilience over elegance, and manual competence over biological dependency. When the lead Zephyrian vessel, the Celestial Harmony, established communication with what they expected to be Commander Veltar, they instead found themselves speaking with Captain Morrison, whose calm professionalism and obvious command of their most advanced warship created a cognitive dissonance that rippled through the rescue fleet's command structure like a harmonic earthquake. Morrison's opening statement was carefully crafted to establish humanity's new status. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human-controlled vessel Dominion's Edge, requesting permission to establish formal diplomatic contact between the Terran Colonial Authority and the Zephyrian Confederation, words that transformed what should have been a hostage situation into a first contact scenario that placed both species on equal footing for the first time in their brief but eventful relationship. The Zephyrian fleet commander, Admiral Kethvar, responded with the kind of barely controlled shock that came from watching the impossible become routine, his musical voice carrying harmonics of confusion as he struggled to process how beings his civilization had classified as barely sentient were now operating one of their most sophisticated vessels with apparent expertise while holding his fellow officers in what appeared to be comfortable but secure detention. Morrison allowed Kethvar to speak with Veltar through the ship's communication system, and the former commander's report painted a picture that challenged every assumption the Zephyrian military had made about human capabilities, describing not conquest through superior firepower but technological mastery achieved through approaches that no Zephyrian engineer would have considered attempting. Rodriguez had spent the hours before the fleet's arrival optimizing the ship's systems beyond their original specifications, her human engineer's instinct for improvement and efficiency creating performance gains that impressed even the alien prisoners, while Parker established communication protocols that demonstrated human mastery of Zephyrian technology at levels that exceeded the capabilities of the ship's original crew. The negotiation that followed revealed the magnitude of the paradigm shift that had occurred. Instead of discussing terms for returning stolen property, the two species found themselves establishing the framework for ongoing diplomatic relations between equals, with Morrison representing a civilization that had proven its technological competence not through theoretical knowledge but through practical demonstration of superior adaptability and problem-solving capabilities. Admiral Kethvar's grudging respect was evident in his increasingly formal tone as he realized that humanity had achieved something no other species in Zephyrian experience had managed. They had not only captured one of their warships but had improved its performance while doing so, demonstrating technological philosophy that prioritized understanding over dependency and competence over automation. The resolution came when Morrison proposed an exchange that would benefit both species. The humans would return the Dominion's Edge and its crew in exchange for formal recognition of humanity as a spacefaring civilization capable of independent technological development, along with access to trade routes and diplomatic channels that would allow human colonies to interact with the broader galactic community as equals rather than curiosities. Veltar and his crew were released with their dignity intact and their bodies unharmed, a gesture of mercy that stood in sharp contrast to their own treatment of human prisoners and demonstrated that humanity's technological competence was matched by ethical development that their captors had failed to recognize. As the Dominion's Edge powered down its weapons systems and prepared for crew transfer, Morrison addressed the assembled Zephyrian officers one final time, his words carrying the weight of a species that had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage. We appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate that technological advancement takes many forms, and we look forward to learning from each other as equals in the years to come. The handover ceremony was conducted with military precision and diplomatic courtesy, with both crews working together to ensure smooth transition of command, and as Morrison and his team prepared to board the rescue shuttle that would return them to human space, Rodriguez couldn't help but smile at the irony that their greatest technological breakthrough had come not from studying alien science but from proving that human ingenuity, adaptability, and stubborn refusal to accept limitations could overcome any obstacle, even those designed by civilizations that considered themselves infinitely superior. The final communication from Admiral Kethvar came as the human shuttle departed. Captain Morrison, your species has earned our respect and our caution in equal measure. We look forward to discovering what other surprises humanity has in store for the galaxy. Words that marked not just the end of an incident but the beginning of humanity's emergence as a power that would never again be underestimated by those who confused technological sophistication with genuine capability.